Beatles arrived in Japan today as their tour of the Far East continues. Across the Pacific in the United States, a furor is developing over comments John Lennon made.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. It should work this time, y'all. My goodness. Okay, here we are. Thank you so much, Nick110. I like your videos too. This has been a long time coming. This is what I was saying before, but none of it picked up, so I gotta start all over. This has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do a stream for a while, because I have never done a stream before. I've literally just never done one before on YouTube. I've always, if you notice, all the content that I make is heavily scripted, you know, or at the very least like 80-90% scripted. It's pretty rare for me to, or I've never really done it before, to just come on here and talk impromptu, talk candidly. And there is some stuff I want to talk about. I have some ideas, you know, a little bit of a list of what I want to talk about already. So if you guys wanted me to talk about certain things, I do have to apologize. I'm going to focus more on my list today, but I got some fun conversations to be had there. Politics and television for the most part. And I hate John Lennon. Yeah, I get it. Look, man, that little intro, just, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the intro, but that little part in the intro was like, the Beatles arrived in Japan today. That is from a song. It is a mashup of Hey Jude and We Major by Kanye. And it is probably one of the greatest songs I've ever heard. It's a mashup. It's not even like an official song. It's a remix. It is incredible. You know, I'll see if I can maybe include it in a video at some point. I don't think there would be any copyright issues with that. But I've been listening to it since I was like 12 years old. And it's been 10 years. Amazing song. Anyways, we got 4 people. I didn't expect too many, but I am very thankful for the 4 people that are here. I didn't expect too many because I have never streamed before. I haven't been putting out content on this channel, you know, for about a few months now. And the main reason for that is where we get into the bread and butter of why I'm here, is that my grand comeback is on its way. Me calling it that is just for marketing purposes. It's just a new video that I'm putting out, but it is by far the video that has taken the most amount of time, the most amount of effort, resources, editing, filming, recording, producing, rendering, everything in between. I can't say whether it's my best video yet because that's not for me to decide, but to me, in my opinion, this is far and away the video I'm most proud of. 24 single-space pages, y'all. I wrote 24 single-space, and that's just what's going into the video. In total, I wrote like 40. Okay, so I put a lot of effort into this because it is an incredibly sweeping conversation that needs to be had. It is about neoliberal populism, which is, you know, you guys might have realized at this point that I like to sort of coin terms for myself, at least to a certain degree on this channel, and use those terms in, you know, how I talk about different issues. So in this case, the video is on neoliberal populism. It is on a right-wing hegemony that has dominated the politics, discourse, and economy of the global superpower for over half a century now. And it is truly something special. I don't say that lightly because the last thing I would ever want to do is underdeliver. It's something special, and it is coming out within a matter of a few days now. I put out a promo for the video on my channel. You guys should definitely check that out. It's called This American Carnage. It's a short. For some reason, the short did not reach too many people in the algorithm. So if you want to see a little bit of a promo for this new video, a little bit of a taste of what's to come, go ahead and check out that short. And what else is there to get out of the way before I get started? Oh yeah, I do make videos on TikTok. Some of you may disapprove of that, but my TikTok username is Ali Nisa Lisa. And if you do want to hear more of what I have to say, if you want to hear more of me talking for whatever reason, then go ahead and check me out there because I tend to upload more frequently. You know, it's a smaller platform. You know, you can make short form content that's around a minute, 2 minutes long, talking about whatever it is you want to talk about that's going on in the world. And there's less of a reason for me to put in as much effort and time into each single video that I do here. So YouTube is more so for like the long form video essay type of discussions that are much deeper in their analysis and much more sprawling in their scope. Whereas TikTok is for still pretty deep and complex discussions, but discussions that can be had within a matter of, you know, 2-3 minutes or so. Both platforms fill their niches, and Yeah, if you want to hear more of me talk for whatever reason, then go check me out on TikTok at Ali Nisa Lisa. That is Ali Nisa, my name, and then Lisa. Pretty straightforward. All right, so let's get started. There's a few things I want to talk about. This is the main reason why I did this stream, not to promote my content or anything like that, but there's some stuff that's been on my mind, about politics and media, what have you, recently that I just sort of wanted to, talk about off the cuff. I want to talk about statues, first and foremost, because I recently saw a video by Bill Maher and Jake Tapper. You all know William Maher, the one true liberal left. Dave Rubin used to be the one true liberal, and now it's William Maher. And this was a video he did, or an interview he did with Jake Tapper from CNN. So, two incredible human beings, amazing political opinions to go with both of them. And they were having a discussion about wokeness, what defines being woke. How do you, a lot of people have been asking conservatives that recently, how do you define woke? So they asked Bill Maher that. Jake Tapper asked Bill Maher. And Bill Maher responded by saying, I believe it is people who are not building on liberalism, but very often undoing it. This is Bill Maher's words, not mine. 5 years ago, Abraham Lincoln was not a controversial figure among liberals. We liked him. That's what Bill Maher was saying. I'm not saying this. Bill Maher was saying that. Now they want to tear his name off schools and tear down his statues. And the reason why this caught my attention was because it was being responded to by another very famous, I think more of a liberal YouTuber than a leftist YouTuber, a guy named David Pakman. And David's response, as well as the comments that he got in response to his response, it illuminated a lot. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean. His response was that is not happening. His response was that they're not trying to take down Lincoln's name off statues. They're trying to take Robert E. Lee's name off statues, a Confederate soldier's name off statues. That's what that's what David Pakman did. He went down the list, he looked up Abraham Lincoln statue removal or name removal off schools, what have you, and he couldn't find anything. And so he concluded that this isn't actually happening. This is a nothing burger of a conversation that David Pakman or Bill Maher is having, and his fans agreed. This isn't actually happening. This is just a caricature of what the liberals or what the left want. And the funny thing is, Bill Maher was right. That is happening. There was a story, I believe, from California. I don't remember if it was California or some other sort of western state, maybe Washington state, where there was a school in which there was a pretty significant outcry among, I believe, the faculty or the students, or maybe both, to get Abraham Lincoln's name removed from that school. And so the argument that David Pakman was making was essentially that, this isn't happening, but it would be absurd if it was, He did not make the argument whatsoever on the substance of whether taking Lincoln's name off a statue is okay. He made the argument, this isn't happening, so why are we having this conversation? And this is one thing I cannot stand about the left. It's always on the back foot. Our discourse, for the most part at least, especially when it comes to more controversial issues like this surrounding race and surrounding racial legacies and a racial regime of the United States of America for so many years, it's always on the back foot. It's always reactive. It's never proactive. It's never going on the offense. It's never going forward with what your opinions are. It's always just trying to downplay and be on the defensive. Because the only reasonable response for David Pakman to have had in response to Bill Maher saying that is that they are taking Lincoln's name off statues, and it is a shame it did not happen sooner. And I'll tell you exactly why I believe that. There was a debate, I believe, in 1858. You guys have probably heard of the Douglas Lincoln debates. Pretty famous series of debates. And this was, I think, at the time, it was a series of presidential debates, or it might have been a series of debates for a Senate election. But there was a conversation had between Douglas and Lincoln where the debate was cordial, the debate was fun, the debate was relatively light in terms of its tone. There was banter, there was applause, and there were jokes made between the two candidates. And the topic of discussion was whether black civilians, should be considered fully human or not human at all. Lincoln said, I believe they should be considered, whether or not black civilians should be considered partly human or not human at all. And Lincoln said, I believe they should be considered partly human. I don't think these people should be owned as property, but I do not believe in any respect that these individuals have the ability, the cognitive, physical, emotional, spiritual, religious, what have you ability to serve on juries with white civilians, to vote alongside white civilians, to live alongside white civilians in any respect, to marry white civilians, to own property the same way white civilians do. He went down the line, every single possible right, privilege, and everything in between you can possibly imagine. The man said that these rights and privileges, what have you, do not belong to the black population in any way, shape, or form. Now, to a lot of people, that might be pretty straightforward, right? Yeah, sure, Lincoln was not, a relatively progressive guy. But what I will never understand for the life of me is that we all know for an absolute fact that if the roles were reversed, if there was a black politician in the United States of America who said openly during a debate, surrounded by black civilians of all different forms, black constituents of all different forms, who then applauded when he then says, I don't believe white civilians have the physical, cognitive, or biological ability to live alongside us. I believe we need to enshrine their inferiority, of white civilians into law in every way, shape, and form. And anybody who says, I don't believe in that, is lying to you, because that is the only reasonable stance we can take. They shouldn't serve on juries, they shouldn't vote, they shouldn't go to the same schools. They don't deserve to live alongside black folks, because they are not on our level in any way, shape, or form. Can you imagine what the response would be? We all know what the response would be. I don't even have to say it. This person, their name would be scrubbed from the history books, right? They would be called a radical racial agitator in every sense of the term. There would never be a single conversation even to be had about whether or not this person should be commemorated. They would be demonized and vilified in the history books for years to come. Any black politician in the United States that gained a single semblance of political success, if they were to say those words, we all know what the response would be. And you want to know something? Rightfully so. I'm not saying that that's unreasonable, that we should not believe or that we should treat that person differently. Because if you come out in favor of a racial hierarchy and legalizing that racial hierarchy, putting that racial hierarchy in law, in writing, in every single possible form, and consolidating it behind the opinions of the courts, the opinions of the public, the opinions of every legal and political institution that you have, no matter how much thuggishness, no matter how much violence, no matter how much trauma, brutalization, no matter how much you destroy the self-esteem and the self-respect and the dignity of the people that you are brutalizing, it is more important to have that illusion of civility and the maintenance of that thuggish racial hierarchy than it is to actually deliver for these people in a way that treats them the way that every human being should be treated, with a basic level of respect and dignity. Lincoln did not believe that. He did not believe black civilians were entitled to a basic level of respect and dignity. And me personally, as a principle, I believe that if anybody, believes in a racial hierarchy, or if they believe in the plague of white hegemony or white supremacy, that is a firm disqualifier for commemoration. We should be taught about that person in schools. Of course people should. Children should be taught about that person. They should be taught about in museums. But I do not see how you can in any way, shape, or form justify a black child going to a school where they have to look up to the name of somebody who did not believe that black child was fully human. And they have to see that person constantly revered, deified by every single person that you can possibly imagine within the country they live in. Can you imagine the impact that has on one's self-esteem? The impact that has on what that says about the society you live in and how it values you, whether it values you to begin with? That this person who, again, did not believe you were fully human, did not believe that you should live in this society. They believe that once we're done brutalizing y'all for hundreds and hundreds of years and owning you as property, we'll ship you back to a different continent. And these black children have to look at the name of somebody who believed that to the fullest and see that person revered and revere that person themselves. And if they don't, they're the ones who are called crazy. They're the ones who are called hysterical. They're the ones who are called radical, unsophisticated, worthy of disdain. I guarantee you there are people watching this video, this stream right now, who rolled their eyes when I brought this stuff up. I guarantee you. Because overwhelmingly, when I talk about these sorts of issues with a lot of white liberals in particular, and even some white leftists, the response is a roll of the eye and a shrug of the shoulder, being like, "Oh, I guess we got to talk about this now. We don't really want to, but we gotta throw them a bone. We gotta have this little conversation about race, and then we can move on to remembering the Emancipation Proclamation. We can move on to remembering the Civil War." I don't see how people can make that sort of conclusion, knowing that they would never ever give that sort of recourse, that sort of nuance, that sort of pause to any sort of black or brown politician within their country that said even one iota of those sorts of words about white civilians. They know they would never give them any sort of pause or nuance or moment to be like, well, is that really necessary to bring up? There wouldn't be any sort of discussion like that. It would be the only thing brought up when discussing that black or brown hypothetical politician. Except they know that that's never going to happen. They know that the institutions, when I say they, I mean white liberals, they know that the institutions of the country in which they reside is never ever going to allow any sort of politician to come out and to believe in a racial hierarchy that puts white folks near the bottom. And again, nor should they. That should not exist. There should not be any racial hierarchy of any form. That is the only reasonable stance to take. But again, when it comes to a racial hierarchy that does not put the white population at the bottom, and instead puts them at the top, no matter how violent and brutal and traumatic that hierarchy is, that regime is, no matter the fact that it went on to directly inspire one of the most evil regimes in human history, that being the regime of fascism. If you don't believe me, read Mein Kampf. That man believed to the fullest that the United States had developed a playbook that he could then build upon when it comes to its racial hierarchy. He admired the United States' Jim Crow regime, the evil Jim Crow regime. He admired the institution of chattel slavery. Again, one of the most violent and thuggish institutions to ever exist in human history. You look into, man, the extent to which this racial regime has existed within the United States and within my country, Canada, over the course of generations, hundreds and hundreds of years. There is no going back. You can never see your government the same way again when you really learn about all that was and all that is to that racial regime, and again, how violent and traumatizing it was for years and years, hundreds and hundreds of years on end. There's no going back. You want to know about red pill shit? That's some red pill shit right there. You will never look at your government the same way again. And to people like Mar, that discussion, right, about that regime that Lincoln believed in, consolidated, supported, endorsed, a regime that went on to inspire the evil of fascism, that discussion is an aside. Nothing more than an aside. It's something that we can bring up if we got to, but do we really want to? No. And that's all people like him will ever see it as. The condescension, the pretentiousness that drips from these people's voices, from so many of these white liberals' voices, when you bring up these sorts of issues, never ceases to amaze me. They don't even realize it. They don't even realize that they're being condescending. They don't realize that they're not looking at this from the perspective of human beings being tortured for generations on end. They're looking at it from the perspective of, this is a political conversation and nothing more. And man, it blows my mind. I'll never understand it. I'll never understand how David Pakman could look at a man like Lincoln and say that we can ignore every single thing that he believed in and supported. And again, the regime that he fought for in every respect. He fought for that regime, that racial regime, at the Douglas debates. Reconstruction, as I'm sure many of you know, was a failure. It did not work. It ended incredibly quickly, and once it did, these same people that were supposedly liberated were then surrounded once more by endless terrorism, endless bloodshed, pillaging, property destruction, rape. And again, to people like Mar, to even people like David Pakman, that is an aside. It's not something important to bring up. And the men who believed in that regime and who propped it up on their shoulders, well, we don't really have to talk about that. We can talk about the fact that they were really, really good military generals too. Absurdity, absolute absurdity. I'll end with this. This little conversation, I'll end with this. There are countless inventors, commanders, innovators, leaders, people worthy of reverence, throughout your society's history, who never ever believed in such a notion. The idea that if we do not teach kids that these men that again believed in the sluggish, violent racial trauma, the idea that if we don't teach children about them, being gods in our eyes, that suddenly children will have no role models, nobody to look up to in any way, shape, or form in society. That is unequivocally false. Give Robert Smalls a statue. Give James Baldwin a statue. These are heroes from your society's history. These are some of the most incredible men that you can look at, especially Robert Smalls, throughout your society's history. These are people that embodied the values of hard work, of discipline, of strength, of courage, of bravery, of resilience. These incredible values, they embody them to the core, and yet they never ever once believed that certain people of certain races should have a boot placed on their neck in perpetuity by the superior race that happens to be the same one that they share, the same race that they are, who never ever believed in that notion. So, I find this discussion around statues to be so warped, so warped, because even saying that Robert E. Lee's statue should be taken down is controversial to many, many people, let alone Abraham Lincoln, who's seen as one of the most profound, one of the most deified, revered leaders in American history. Hillary Clinton and Howard Stern were having a discussion on radio. I remember listening to this radio interview a few years ago, and they were asked, who's your favorite president? And Hillary said Lincoln. I think Howard Stern said Lincoln as well. When the discussion around Lincoln comes up, it's always, what a beautiful man, what a great man, Emancipation Proclamation, and never once is it brought up that he not only believed in, again, one of the most evil racial institutions to ever exist within human history. And again, we're just talking about the black population here. We're not even talking about the indigenous population. We're not even talking about the authoritarianism of the United States government abroad, and how that has decimated black and brown populations all across the globe. We're just talking about their domestic torture of a population that they kidnapped from a different continent, brutalized for centuries, and then had the gall to tell them that, oh, you shouldn't be upset. What are you upset for? Well, why do we need to talk about this stuff? Can't we just let it go? Why are you bitter? Why are you resentful? Warped. Absolutely warped. It's a discourse from the Twilight Zone. It's a discourse from Bizarro Land, and it's a discourse that is everywhere within our culture. What I'm saying to you right now is in no way, shape, or form the popular sentiment that you will see not just in a country like the US, but even in a country like mine, like Canada. It is in no way, shape, or form the popular sentiment. It is overwhelmingly an unpopular opinion. It may be true, but it's not very popular. And it does not have, I think, nearly as much of a punch to it as, somebody with not a lot to say, but a great smile. So, I'll look at some of these comments here, because I was talking for quite a bit. I didn't check out the comments. He admired Manifest Destiny. Yeah, absolutely. Lebensraum. He admired it to the core. And it just, again, the one thing I always think back to is just a sheer double standard. I brought this up in my Polite Tyranny video as well, that if, an imperialist Islamic power, imperialist Arab power, had invaded the Netherlands and kidnapped white children and forced them to learn Arabic in their schools, in their boarding schools, and never seeing their family ever again, do you think there would even be a conversation about whether or not this is right, whether or not this is something that needs to have NATO troops immediately enter the country to liberate it over? There wouldn't be a single discussion, and everyone knows there wouldn't be a single discussion, and yet with the exact same thing happens, the exact same thing. The only difference being that the races are changed, the races are reversed. There is not only ignorance of these sorts of issues, but there is justification. At every single turn, there is a justification. People saying that it's not that big a deal, or they're saying that this is right, this is exactly what we needed. This sort of, the idea that whichever side can inflict more sophisticated violence and destruction and suffering on the other should naturally have the right to reign, with the culture and the family units and the fables and the stories and the histories of the nations being invaded meaning absolutely nothing. That is the extent of our modern day racial discourse. Not just within the US again, but within Canada too. It's really something. It's really something. It's warped in every sense, and I hope that y'all will see it next time you see anybody having these sorts of discussions about taking down statues, being about teaching white children to hate themselves. I don't want a single white child out there to hate themselves. Let me be completely clear. I do not like white guilt. I don't think it does a single thing for anybody. I think it tends to enable a lot of mealy-mouthing and a lot of meandering and a lot of, we're very sorry for what's happened in the past instead of any real tangible action. to enable, the liberation of people who haven't had that liberation in the past. So I don't believe in white guilt. I don't want any white child out there or any white person out there to feel guilty about themselves, to feel shame about themselves, to hate themselves. And anybody who tells you I do is lying to you. The only thing that I can say I want people out there to feel, including the white folks, is to be mad. That is the only emotion I want you to feel in response to what I'm saying. I want you to be angry. Because being angry is, again, the only reasonable thing you can feel when hearing what I'm saying. Or when going through these issues, tit for tat, or really going down the list of what they are and what they imply on any sort of tangible basis. The only emotion that is reasonable to feel is anger. I shouldn't say the only emotion, but if you do feel anger, no one would blame you, and anyone who would blame you has lost their mind. So, again, I don't believe in making people hate themselves or anything resembling that. But you should be mad that this sort of injustice has not only gone unanswered for so long, that there were people who lived and died as property, or who lived and died being told constantly that they don't matter, their self-esteem doesn't matter, their family doesn't matter, their neighborhood doesn't matter, and they never got a whiff of liberation their entire lives. Generations of people who lived in regimes such as that. The only possible response to have to that is pure and reasonable, justified anger. So I'm going to move on to something else now, because I've been talking about this for a while. I wanted to talk about what's his name? Bernie Sanders. What do y'all think about Bernie Sanders? I would love to hear some of y'all's opinions about him before I get into this. There's a delay on this stream, so I really don't know how streams work exactly. There's a delay, so I see comments later than they come through, or do I see them at the exact same time that they come through? But there's always some sort of delay. I'm not sure which end the delay is on, whether you guys are hearing me later than I actually speak, or whether I'm seeing comments later than they actually come out. But what do y'all think about Bernie? I'll give you all a second, because I want to get a bit of an idea among my fan base of what you guys think about him before I go off, because I have some choice words for the man. Love Bernie, has been in the fight for his whole life. I want to like Bernie, but he has a spine. Kagami, it's so true. That is really what Nick 110, you got it, man. Without fear, you got it too, man. Because look, I have respect for the man. There's no way I can't have respect for the man, because he took a wing of the Democratic Party that was overwhelmingly small when he was first running for president in 2016, and that has since expanded, to a pretty significant degree. But at the same time, I feel like he never really was the guy. He was never the man, He was never the man. He never came off to me as a true, viable alternative to the liberal-conservative dichotomy. And that's something I talk about a lot in my new video coming up. How even Bernie Sanders, even AOC, even Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, all of these supposedly progressive members of Congress within the United States, have any of them said Fred Hampton's name out loud once? Really, have any of them said his name out loud once? Have any of them mentioned COINTELPRO, or the criminal collusion of local police departments with the feds that the COINTELPRO operation was centered on? Have any of them mentioned, any sort of discussion surrounding class consciousness, any sort of discussion surrounding a true expansion of the public resources that the masses of their society would have access to, beyond piecemeal discussions about tiny policies such as an expansion of public education or an expansion of infrastructure? I mean, look, I will say this. When it comes down to it, if there was a left-wing politician within the United States of America who put forward at the core, of their policy positions, the economy, crime, energy security, manufacturing, trade, unions, these sorts of issues, I think that person would win. I think they would have a very good shot at winning, because these are bread and butter issues that, believe me, can appeal to people in a way that I think many politicians in America they don't seem to want to understand. There seems to be this idea within the US's politics that you fit within the mold of either a Democratic or Republican Party. And that is the one way to succeed. Even left-wing politicians within, the Democratic Party, they espouse Democrat talking points at every single turn. You listen to their speeches, and Kamala Harris's speeches don't sound all that different from Bernie Sanders. What would differentiate him, and I will get into what I said before about economy, crime, national security, what have you, but what would differentiate him is if he came out and said openly that the federal government of the United States ended this man who was able to put together through the Rainbow Coalition this country's one and only incredibly successful multiracial labor-based political coalition. A political coalition that not only was able to deliver materially for the people of Illinois, where they were stationed, through a free breakfast program. 20,000 kids a day they fed every single day with free breakfasts. Legal clinics and legal advice for citizens dealing with tyrannical police officers. A roster of motivated lawyers to represent working people in the courts. What else is there? Treating people for sickle cell anemia. That, again, the government nor the private sector ever would without billing them up the ass or overwhelming them with paperwork. They had demonstrated a record, a pattern of success, and despite that, despite the playbook that they wrote, despite the fact that they were able to disprove the long-held political gospel, the Rainbow Coalition was able to disprove the long-held political gospel of the United States, and even here in Canada, that you either talk about class or you talk about race. You never talk about both. Despite that, and despite the way that it ended, despite the sheer injustice in the way that the Rainbow Coalition ended, where it was illegally and covertly destroyed by a government that did not like the fact that this was a class coalition that was able to reject their preferred narrative of race. Despite the fact that its story is so profoundly sad and powerful, not a single one of these presidential candidates have mentioned Hampton's name once. I cannot think of a single presidential candidate in the history of the country that has mentioned Hampton's name. There is a vacuum there. There is an opportunity for these politicians to differentiate themselves, truly differentiate themselves, to get a viral moment on social media that reaches people in a way that no politician has been able to reach folks since President Trump ran in 2016. And yet none of them take it, Bernie in particular, because I understand why Kamala wouldn't take that chance. I understand why Biden wouldn't take that chance. I understand why Bush, Obama, these folks wouldn't take that chance. But Bernie, this man was supposed to be different, wasn't he? He was supposed to be a true differentiator, not just of himself and his own political ideology or his own political mode of thought, but somebody who would be able to, again, put forward a true and viable alternative to the never-ending hot potato of liberal conservative politics, and he just wasn't able to do that. You listen to his stump speeches every single time. Again, they don't sound all that different from what Obama has said in the past. They don't sound all that different from what Biden has said in the past. And I think that Bernie, I don't even feel, people will say that, I'm saying Bernie should have been more extreme. Bernie should have been more, ideological in his opinions. I don't even think necessarily he had to be. I just think that he had to differentiate himself from the Democrats in a way that would reach the masses of the country, in a way that would get people who are flicking through the channels on the 9 o'clock news to stop for a second and be like, whoa, I didn't no idea the Rainbow Coalition even existed. Who the hell is Fred Hampton? Or I want to focus on this issue first. I was going to go on into manufacturing and jobs and the economy, but to wrap up this little section about Fred Hampton, it really is something to me, the way that he did not see it as necessary to accomplish what he desires, to write the history books rather than read them, and you don't win presidential politics that way. I'm not saying that I know that I'm an expert on any of these issues, but I can look to one particular example, which is, again, President Trump in 2016. The reason I go back to that example, I don't like the man whatsoever, obviously. We're talking about a neoliberal hack through and through, despite the fact that he branded himself as a truth teller and as a people's champion. He was a neoliberal hack. But he was able to go from one of the saddest positions in the Republican Party ever, where every single politician within that party, the media apparatus of that party, the Congress people, the senators, the governors, the donors, every single one of them saw him as a complete and utter joke. When he first came down that escalator, Trump in 2015, There was a poll that was done June 2015 where 90% of Republican primary voters at that time said they would never vote for President Trump once. They would never vote for him. And 4 years later, the dynamic is literally on its head. It is quite literally reversed, a polar opposite, where now 90% say they would never vote for anybody except for him. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about 4 years after 2016 being 2020, or around 2019, 2020. So if somebody was able to go from that incredibly, depressed position where every single member of that party, from the rank and file voters to the infrastructure, the party apparatus, the politicians, the donors, what have you, they were all able to go from seeing this guy as a joke to seeing him as the only possible leader. A guy who not only took over that party, but has taken over one half of American presidential politics. There's something to study there. There's absolutely something to look at there. And I think one of the main reasons why he was able to get there is the manner of speech. There was something about being able to talk off the cuff. There's something about just being able to talk to people like they're human beings and not run every single thing through analysts or focus groups, what have you, that appeals to people, even people who may not politically agree with you. There are a lot of Republicans who did not politically agree with Trump. They didn't agree with his opinions on healthcare. They didn't agree with his opinions on abortion. They didn't agree with his opinions on gay marriage. I know these issues aren't as dangerous to the ruling class as, leftist policy, of course, but cultural opinions or culture war positions, man, these things can really, really make or break politicians, particularly in the Republican Party. So they absolutely made a massive, massive difference that this man did not believe in these things. He did not believe in, in the government not having a role in healthcare. He did not believe, and right after the Tea Party, that was a massive, massive shift from Republican orthodoxy. And the way that he was able to win those people over, the biggest way, was his rhetoric and his style of speech, his bombastic ass style of speech. And there's something about seeing a left-wing alternative within not just the United States, but within any country that is willing to just talk to people like they're human beings, tell them things that no other politician would tell them, mention Hampton's name, mention the long-standing history of, the deep state's criminal coups and aided overthrows in other countries, in like Iraq and Libya and what have you, Chile, Argentina, that have created untold political instability to this day. I don't know. I think it would be something incredible to see a politician, a presidential contender, actually talk about these issues out loud. It would have an instant appeal to many, many people, particularly a great degree of, I think, the politically unaffiliated, people who aren't really into politics, because again, they feel like none of these people ever talk to them like they're human beings. They talk to them like they're robots constantly. And anyways, I did want to get on to Without Fear, also an opportunity to get assessed. That is true, but why would you go into this game of presidential politics if you are not willing to put it all on the line to win? And you're not willing to truly create something special, to create a coalition that can change the narrative rather than feed it. You also have to remember that Hampton's assassination was in the 1960s, 1969. It's been a long time since that. I'm not saying that the governments of the world don't do covert illegal operations. Still, of course they do. But talking about something, there was literally a movie made about the guy, Judah and the Black Messiah. There was a full-length feature film made, millions of people saw it. There have been documentaries made about the guy. If this was the 1970s, maybe I could see your point. Today, there would not be any recourse for the federal government to act against a politician talking about what has been public knowledge and common knowledge for over half a century now. If there was a movie made about the guy, that right there is really what you got to look at. If there's a movie made about the guy, then someone bringing it up at a presidential debate should be the least of the federal police's worries. Nick 110, I have to leave to pick up my partner. Oh, you're a good partner. But I like listening to you talk. Oh, you guys are sweet. I gotta read some of these comments, man. I keep talking, I'm not reading the comments. I gotta read some of these comments. Sound dealer, he's better than Biden or Trump. Absolutely. Talking about Bernie Sanders, absolutely. But again, I feel like he was better in terms of the policy positions that he would be able to enact if he was president. But it's also about putting together that winning coalition first. You know, you got to get there first. And I think that there is a profound lack of interest, not just here in, sorry, not just in the US, but also here in Canada, regarding the politically unaffiliated. Politicians very, very rarely seem to want to go after or seem to even care about the politically unaffiliated, people who don't vote. The overwhelming segment of the voting population that does not vote, does not care too much about politics, but only really pays attention when, again, there's a viral moment that they see on social media. There are millions and millions of Americans. I think something like 30-40% of the American electorate is made up of those sorts of politicians. And here in Canada, it's around a similar degree. You know, I think it might be less. I think it might be around 20-30%. But if you could even win half of that electorate to come out and vote for you, right? You could upend the entire understanding of liberal conservative politics. And again, you don't brand it by telling people that you're extreme. You don't brand it by telling people that you're ideological. You brand it by telling people that you believe in a peoples-based political organization, because that is what left-wing policy can deliver for people, right? And only left-wing policy can deliver based on a peoples-based political organization, because liberal and conservative politics is much more convinced or much more concerned about the good of markets, the good of private markets, and the good of business interests and what have you, than they are the good of the general population. You know, there's a reason why any discussion about ending homelessness, for instance, or ending poverty among the liberals or the conservatives is always had in some sort of term or some sort of economic terms. You know what I mean? The conversation is always had being like, okay, well, if we end homelessness, what will the economic impact of that be? It's not like that's not an important conversation to be had, but they don't see ending homelessness in of itself as an incredible achievement, as a tremendous accomplishment and a tremendous success, a tremendous win. They don't look at it that way, because liberal conservative politics is so much more concerned, again, with markets, the interests of markets, than they are the interests of people. And you make that clear to people. You make it clear that the only possible movement that you can find when running a campaign, for instance, that is going to stand up for your interests. And, you know, you can even co-opt that one phrase that Trump has used. They're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. It's a very powerful phrase. There's a chance to create something special there. And people will say, this is just one more thing I want to say, people will say that these conversations are way too controversial, they're way too politically incorrect to be had. And all I would say to that is, says who? Really? Who, like, I've talked about this on TikTok. Who says we can't talk about these things? The people who tell us we can't are people like Jake Tapper, people like Bill Maher, people like the political analysts, the scholars, the media pundits, everybody in between. We've never had a major coalition within Turtle Island, within the US or Canada, take the approach I've just laid out. How do we know whether something's going to work if it's never even been tried? You know? Hold on, I'm getting a text. Give me one sec, y'all. That was so covert. I literally had her down here. I didn't know if my phone screen could show up on camera. I did not want to take no chances. So, hold on. We got some more comments here. Cornel West. Everything you're describing is what Cornel West is trying to do. What are your thoughts on him? It's a good question. I don't know too much about Cornel West. I'll be honest with you. I haven't looked too much into what exactly he was trying to do, what his campaign... I will say this. He really messed up at the beginning by running, I believe, with the Green Party. Was it the Green Party or maybe another party? But he ran with one party and then he immediately changed course and ran with another party. Look, you have to understand, any leftist who is running for presidential politics or any sort of political position within a capitalist country, you are going to have an incredibly uphill battle. The bar for you is significantly higher than it is for any of these other politicians. Because this is not a country that is made for left-wing policy. You know, it's made for the liberal conservative status quo. So you have to project a level of sophistication and a level of success and a level of not just professionalism, but a level of organization, you know, that the other politicians are not held to. And from the get-go, Cornel West was not able to project that allure, that vision of success and of organization and of having everything together. You know, he immediately came off looking amateur hour, because you don't announce a presidential campaign and then immediately change your party. You might think this is a a bad criticism to have, because it's not about his policy positions. But again, I don't really know too much about his policy positions. I agree, it's not about the substance of what he's saying, but optics mean a lot, man. Optics mean a lot, presentation means a lot. And if you want to win a political coalition, you have to come off as having your shit together. You have to come off as a leader. You have to come off as somebody who can stand toe to toe with politicians of other countries, with Putin, with Xi, with Trudeau. Maybe not Trudeau, because no one cares about him. But you have to be able to come off as somebody who can defend the interests of your country when dealing with these nuclear powers on a global basis. How are you going to be able to project that image when you can't even decide what party you want to run as? So I do think that Cornel West, he's done incredible work in the past. He's an academic, he's a professor, he's a civil rights activist, and he's done, I don't know too much about him, but I do know that he's done incredible work in the past. I just feel that he fumbled out of the gate. And first impressions, you only get one chance to make a first impression. I think that he made a very poor first impression, and I think he did himself no favors with that initial fumbling of the ball. Anyway, so I did want to talk about what I brought up earlier about what I believe, Bernie should have run on instead of what he did run on. And let me see this. He changed party from People's Party to Green Party because not every state has People's Party on the ballot. Yeah, I'm sure he had a good reason for it. I think there was also some sort of infighting or some sort of toxic bullying, what have you, going on within one of the parties that he was a part of. That might have just been a rumor. I'm not entirely sure. So it is a good reason. But again, that does not reflect in the headlines. That does not reflect when it comes to the, swing voters in Missouri, you know what I mean, who are essential to winning the Electoral College. It doesn't reflect on them. It doesn't reflect in their minds when they see a headline of, Cornel West announces presidential campaign, immediately switches party. And again, these people don't have an obligation to look into the semantics and the specifics of why you change parties. All they know is that, okay, this person doesn't even know what party they want to run as. It does not look good. Anyways, I've been talking about Cornel for a bit. I don't want to make it seem like I don't like Cornel. I don't want to make it seem like I have something against the guy. I don't. I just do not think that he is the man to become president of the United States and to really put forward a people's political project that could deliver for the masses of the society, and deliver for their economy, for their housing, for their social stability, for their crime. I don't see him as being the one, Then again, I don't see any politician right now being the one. So that's no disrespect to Cornel West. Okay, I gotta take a drink. Hold on. Man, my voice is hoarse. I've been talking endlessly. No water. We're coming on with about an hour so far. This has been fun. I'm going to stay here for a little bit longer. And I appreciate the 5 viewers that are still here. Y'all are cool. Y'all mean a lot to me. And hopefully one day we'll have a much, much bigger audience. I think after this new video of mine comes out, you will definitely see, well, I hope you'll see an expansion of the audience, because this is definitely something that I think could get a lot of new fans or new subscribers' attention. So I really cannot wait for y'all to see this new video I have coming out. This is something incredible. I've said it before, but I am so happy with the way this video has turned out. It is just far and away so much bigger and so much grander than anything else I've ever made, to the point where I can't call it a video essay. I gotta call it a mini documentary. I gotta be a lord of semantics here, and distinguish between the two. There isn't any real distinction between video essay and mini documentary, in my opinion, but I think mini documentary, mini doc, is a bit of a better phrase to use to describe it than video essay, because the scope of its analysis and its production quality is a different level from anything I've done in the past. Okay, so Bernie, let's talk about what I think he could have done differently. I think he should have put the economy and should have put economic success and economic prosperity, particularly as it pertains to the industrial sector of his country, first and foremost. The manufacturing base of a country has always been, I think, the base of the left-wing party. People will say otherwise, but if you look at the Labour Party within the United Kingdom, its base was overwhelmingly made up of manufacturing workers and industrial workers. Here in Canada, the NDP, and its previous iterations, previous incarnations, the CCF, its base has always been, once again, the manufacturing workers, the industrial base, the people who produce, the people working in the factories, the people who produce goods. And we have seen a complete and utter abandonment of these people for so goddamn long now. In American politics and in Canadian politics, for 50 years, there has been a complete and utter abandonment of the manufacturing base, of the industrial sector, through not just a commitment to the holiness of the free market, through a commitment to free trade and the ability of firms to export their capital and their goods and their labor across the globe at no expense as a product of free trade, but also as a product of a lack of any federal industrial policy, which is what we have seen in every single American presidential administration and every single Canadian government since, again, the 1970s. There has been a complete and utter lack of a federal industrial policy, that being federal funds and resources and tools to incentivize and grow goods production within your country by giving firms a reason to come to you over other countries, That is something where I think Bernie could have really shined. If he had leaned heavily into manufacturing in the same way that Trump did in 2016, if he had leaned heavily into trade, I think that he would have been able to win over a significant amount of voters from Michigan. I think he'd be able to win over a significant amount of voters from Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I can't remember if Bernie won Michigan. I think he lost Michigan against Biden, the primary. I think he would have won Michigan had he leaned heavily into trade and had he made the point that these Democrat politicians of the past have robbed you dry. They have robbed you dry by not only refusing to invest in your localities, in your factories, in your industry, but also by an unquestioned obedience to free trade and trade liberalization, which has led to your jobs being shipped overseas at no additional expense whatsoever to the firms. And you could talk about how business interests for many, many years in American history, throughout the 70s and 80s, lobbied the manufacturing world of the United States to move away from vertically situated models of enterprise, to outsource everything they didn't need to do themselves, to make their firms more compelling as instruments for investors to hold as assets, rather than as, firms that can produce goods and services. And there is so much appeal behind that sort of rhetoric that I think a lot of politicians miss out on. Again, I'm not saying that for nothing. I'm saying that because we've never had no politician. So maybe I shouldn't say there's so much appeal, because we've never had a politician say these sorts of things out loud, what I'm saying right now. So it's very possible that what I'm saying could be quite unpopular, Because again, what's true is not always what's popular. You have to remember that. Very, very often those two can clash with each other. So it's very possible that what I'm saying wouldn't work out, but again, it's never been tried. How do you know whether something's going to work if it's never been tried? Focusing head on manufacturing, the manufacturing base of the party, of not just the party, but the country, it would win over the industrial base. And I think from there, you have a foundation to go off of. You can not only discuss the great industrial comeback of the United States, the renewal of America's industrial champions once I'm president, but you can talk about how the economy as a whole will benefit immensely from that. You can talk about it in terms that the average person is going to understand, that it doesn't need, a great understanding of theory or a great understanding of political academia or even of political focus groups, what have you, or political theory. I already said theory. To understand, if you tell them, like, we are going to see a great industrial comeback with my presidency, we are going to see a renewal of our manufacturing base, and we're going to see everything else come downstream from that in terms of our jobs, in terms of our employment growth. We're going to have growth in productivity, which is going to keep a lid on inflation. We're going to have low inflation. We're going to have full employment. We're going to see the greatest economy our country has ever seen. If Bernie talked like that, I really think that Biden would not have stood a chance. I really don't think he would have, because Biden's one of his biggest flaws as well within the 2020 primary is that he was not trusted on the economy. Not whatsoever. He still isn't trusted on the economy, but if you look at all the polling that came out at that time, there was an opening for a left-wing alternative to say that this person is not going to revive our economy. This person is not going to, if not eradicate, dramatically reduce poverty, dramatically reduce homelessness, provide a compelling social contract for our people, in a way that can not just deliver for them materially, but can deliver for their legal conditions as well, can deliver for their political representation, can give them a political representation that actually feels like there's something to offer. You know what I mean? That does not treat these people like they're idiots and does not treat these people like they're expendable human capital. You know, treats them like they're employees worthy of respect and treats them as part of a labor force that is worthy of empowerment and worthy of strengthening. I don't know. There is something to be said there about talking about left-wing policy in these sorts of terms in a way that, again, puts the successes and puts the wins and puts the prosperity that these sorts of policies can bring to the lives of everyday people at the forefront of the conversation. You don't have that among any left-wing Democrat right now, or left-wing Democrat, maybe it's an oxymoron. You don't have that among any left-wing politician, I think, really, that I've seen thus far within the United States or within Canada. I think my issues are more so with Canada because within the US you kind of expect that, okay, the Democrats are not going to be left-wing. Here we do have a left-wing party, you know, it's the NDP, yet they never talk about any of this stuff. If they do, maybe they'll have an article about it on their website here or there, sure, but you will never hear a rally with thousands of screaming supporters talking openly about healthcare expansion, talking about national infrastructure projects, talking about industrial renewal, talking about the manufacturing base, talking about how the country doesn't produce things anymore. You know, you don't get these sorts of conversations that, again, appeal to people's bread and butter issues, the bread and butter issues that they care about more than anything, which is crime, social stability, housing, and economy. And the reason I mention crime, because I didn't talk too much about crime thus far, but the reason I mention crime is because by addressing the socioeconomic rot that fosters crime and that fosters violent crime, such again as poverty, homelessness, you reduce the baseline level of crime that your society sees. You know, you don't eradicate it entirely. Don't get it twisted. There's always going to be some people out there that do want to see the world burn. Maybe some leftists will disagree with me here. But I do believe in punitive measures for crimes of power, you know, when it comes to people like domestic abusers, sex abusers, murderers, corrupt politicians guilty of bribery, of corruption, of other forms of abusing the power that they've been entrusted or abusing a position of power that they took for themselves. I believe those sorts of crimes are incredibly heinous, you know. I think that there's reason to have punitive measures available for people that, again, just do heinous things such as sexual assault. I don't believe in sympathy for rapists. Maybe that's controversial to some folks, but I really don't believe in sympathy for these people because I think sexual assault is one of the lowest, most vicious and repulsive crimes that a human being can commit. But at the same time, should we be putting addicts in cages? Should we be putting homeless people in cages? Of course we shouldn't be. What we should be doing is housing these people, getting them the harm reduction or rehabilitation they need to move away from addiction as a lifestyle, move away from a vice that cannot be contained, and allow them to integrate back into society, allow them to gain employment, allow them to gain housing. And again, I'm saying allow, because the current system does not even allow these people in any respect to have even an iota of a chance of gaining these sorts of basic aspects of integrating back into society once they're let out of prison. For instance, I'm talking mostly about the criminalization of possession here, but a drug crime on your record within the US or within Canada immediately puts you at a complete inability, you know, to gain employment, to gain housing, to gain, acceptance from any landlord, and that's the system we live in, where landlords are everywhere. You just don't have any of these abilities whatsoever once you have a drug crime and a prison sentence on your record, leaving you unable not only to rehabilitate once you're out of prison, but forcing you deeper into the criminal world than you otherwise would have ever gone. So I'm going to talk a lot about this. The reason why I'm not talking too much about crime right now is because I'm going to talk a lot about this in my upcoming video. I have a whole section on crime. I have a whole section on why the left needs to talk more about crime, why the left has given up, conceded the discussion surrounding crime, and how that's been a complete and utter travesty. It's been a complete tragedy, because all that has done is leave a vacuum for liberals and for conservatives to say time and time again that the only possible way that we can cure the social ill of crime, of violent crime, is through more police and more prisons. Police and prisons time and time again. the degradation of individual rights, the complete destruction of natural rights, and overwhelming state repression, overwhelming state force to quell dissent at every single turn. That is the only way we can have safe streets. That's the only way we can have streets where you don't have tent cities, where you don't have people strung out on xylazine, unable to stand while you're walking to your job, that the only way to accomplish that is by putting all these people in cages and hoping that the rest of society forgets about the problem if they're put in cages for long enough. I mean, what a sick society we're talking about here. What kind of conversation is this even? Just saying those words out loud really highlights the absurdity of, I think, our current discourse surrounding crime. And when you address the root factors that foster crime, that leads people down the path of not only criminal careers, but leads people into neighborhoods where they have no positive diversions away from the scourge that neighborhood gangs can often be. Some of these gangs, man, they are senseless and they are violent, but they offer the only image of community and cohesion that many of these people see. And when you get rid of institutional support for any sort of positive diversions away from those causes, leaving, I talk about this in my video again, but leaving children born in neighborhoods where gunshots are heard on an hourly basis in the hands of nothing but their immediate volatile surroundings. What do you expect is going to happen other than people moving towards the only community diversions that they see available from the never-ending trauma and violence that they're surrounded by? And that is how people get co-opted into crime. That's how children get co-opted into crime from a young age. It's how they get manipulated into believing that it's the only possible path for them. And they get stuck in this vicious cycle when their brains are so malleable, when they barely understand who they are or what they want to be with their lives. But all they know is that their entire lives they've seen bloodshed, they've seen destruction. And now, for the first time ever, there's somebody out there who's telling them, stick with us, and you'll finally have a community. It's a sick society we're talking about here, where these sorts of enterprises, these sorts of illegitimate enterprises are the only thing left for many of these folks to cling to. Because again, people will say that, oh, you're being too harsh. I think some leftists would say you're being too harsh on these gangs. Man, these gangs, some of them are vicious, some of them are sick and evil. It's just endless destruction, endless misery, endless suffering. So I really cannot look at that in anything other than that this should not be a thing in any way, shape, or form. But if we're having that discussion about how do we get rid of neighborhood gangs being the only diversions that these children have for millions and millions of kids living in these low-income neighborhoods, then yes, you have to address the root causes that foster that crime to begin with. You can't just throw them all in cages and pretend that the problem has gone away. Because when you do that, all that happens is once they finally get out of those cages, they're now felons, and they now go deeper into those criminal enterprises and those criminal conspiracies and those criminal organizations than they otherwise would have ever gone had they simply been shown, a little bit of warmth when they were 5 or 6 years old by the society they live in. It's a tragedy. It's an absolute tragedy. There's a song by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five called The Message. I think y'all should really listen to that song. The final verse of that song, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It really, honestly, is one of the one songs that I've heard that has been able to sum up or been able to summarize this issue that I'm discussing, of how these children are born with no state of mind and forced essentially to keep no state of mind throughout their entire lives as a consequence of the hell that they're surrounded by. It really sums it up in a way that even I could never do. And it does so in a way that is so profound. It's a beautiful song. It's one of the first ever successful hip-hop tracks ever. And it really is a cry for help. It's an incredible song. So if you listen to that last verse on The Message, I think you'll see something truly beautiful there. It talks a lot about what I've been talking about here. And again, I'm going to talk a lot about this. I feel like it's been harder for me to communicate exactly what I mean or what I want to say here on this stream. But I'm going to have a whole section on crime and the police and prison state in my upcoming video, where I am much more nuanced and much more holistic, much more comprehensive with my discussion. I did want to say one more thing about crime, which is that the liberal conservative status quo never forget that they have nothing to say about the threat to calm, stable social organization that poverty creates. They have nothing to say about how poverty not only rips families apart through a greater likelihood of domestic fights, greater likelihood of violence, but also through a greater likelihood of substance abuse and of increasing one's criminal contacts, which are all strongly documented risk factors for criminal behavior. And that alongside the fact that these people, the liberal conservative status quo, believes in the heavy criminalization of possession. They voted for it overwhelmingly in the 1980s through the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984, within the United States at least. And they voted for it once again in the 1990s with the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act under Bill Clinton. Overwhelming bipartisan support for both of those bills. And all they did was not only throw more addicts in cages, not only exacerbate and aggravate the rot, the struggle, the socioeconomic struggle that poverty creates and that fosters crime, but they took away any and all conversation surrounding how to address this issue from, again, a social contract that actually works for the people within these neighborhoods plagued by this social ill. They took away any conversation surrounding that and moved it entirely towards police, prisons, police, prisons, police, prisons. Clamped down on the dissent with as much brute force as humanly possible, without ever addressing any of the reasons as to why those issues came to arise in that neighborhood over the others. Anyways, I am going to get going now. I've been talking for quite a bit. This was fun. I enjoyed it. I didn't get to talk about everything that I wanted to talk about, but I should address some of these comments before I go. But it is kind of late now. I've been here for over an hour. This was incredibly fun. I enjoyed it. If y'all would like me to do this more often, definitely let me know. I did want to sort of, go off about a couple of issues that I found interesting, right now, before this new video came out. That's why I did this stream today, because a new video releases within a few days now, and I just wanted to put out a live stream before then. But I could definitely do this more often. This has been really fun. So definitely let me know if y'all want me to see this more often. I will address some of these questions first. Nick 110 is the release date for this video. Right now the video I'm making the finishing touches, so it should be out within 2 to 3 days from now. I don't know exactly which day, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, but keep an eye out for it. It will definitely be out within the next week. 2 to 3 days, expected by then. It's very late where I am. Just wanted to say I appreciate what you do, especially things like white liberalism, polite tyranny. Thank you so much, Godoy Aboy. Godoy Aboy. Y'all should be more like Godoy, Mr. Godoy here. Thank you so much. Yogurt Cups, thank you too. Love your vids. Looking forward to the next one. I appreciate it. It means a lot. And I didn't end up getting to television. I said I was going to talk about TV. I didn't do it. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about television. Just for a few minutes before I head out, because I gotta get something off my chest that I've wanted to get off my chest for a long time. Y'all ready? Breaking Bad is better than The Sopranos. I know. I cannot even... Look, I'm not even going to fake it. I'm not even going to pretend like that's a controversial opinion, because anybody who tells me that is a controversial opinion, I am convinced has not seen Breaking Bad, or has not seen The Sopranos, or has not seen both and just parroting what they've been told by the news media and by the liberal media. Because let me tell you something. Breaking Bad refined the playbook that The Sopranos wrote. This is a controversial opinion. You say this out loud, especially in front of, a lot of people who I think grew up or watched a lot of TV during the 2000s. And they lose their minds when you say this. I've had this conversation with, an older white guy that I knew who was a huge fan of, Don Draper, Walter White, Tony Soprano, what have you, which immediately in of itself is okay, well, why are you a fan of those characters? But I told him this, that, I think Breaking Bad is better. This guy spit out his drink, not at me, he spit it out to the side. I don't know if he was doing that to be dramatic, because I really don't think it's that controversial of an opinion, but it refined the playbook that The Sopranos wrote. Walter White is so much better of a character. He feels like a real person. He doesn't feel like this larger-than-life caricature of a mob boss the way that Tony Soprano feels. I feel that Tony Soprano was a great character in of itself, an incredible character. Gandolfini did an amazing, amazing job with that character. But there was a level of disconnect that I think I had with Sopranos. Just watching a series again about like these larger than life, you know, this larger than life criminal enterprise that these people are running. It doesn't have the same, it doesn't have anywhere close to the same authenticity, in my opinion, that a story about a high school teacher, Mr. Rogers. And I don't know if Mr. Rogers is the comparison people make, but there's this meek, egotistical high school teacher becoming a kingpin. I don't know. I find that story to be so much more interesting in of itself, and I also find the character of Walter White to be better acted. I think Bryan Cranston does a better job at acting for the character of Walter White. Actually, no, scratch that. Gandolfini and Cranston, I think both of them did tremendous jobs. I can't say anything about Gandolfini's acting job because he was just an incredible actor, far and away the best actor of that show. But beyond Gandolfini, this is where I think my criticism really begins to shine. Beyond Gandolfini, the other actors did not feel like real people to me. Hank, Marie, Jesse, these people felt like real people. Silvio and Paulie and Christopher, these people felt like, again, I was watching cartoonish stereotypes of these New York or New Jersey Italians. It did not feel like I was watching real people with real issues and real lives to go back home to once the camera stopped rolling. I just did not feel that with Breaking Bad at all. I felt that that show just did a much, much better job, not only in terms of the acting of all of the characters, of the entire cast, but also the supporting characters. There are so many terrible child actors. Oh my god, in The Sopranos. There's like this one scene where AJ is hanging out front outside of a I don't know what is it, a diner, a cafe or something, he's smoking with his friends. Oh my god, the acting of his friends, the high school friends, is horrendous. It's terrible. I don't know what they were thinking because they have Gandolfini on one end and then they have they're not even child actors, they're like young adult actors. This isn't like the 1980s. These people should know how to act. People should know how to read lines, especially for a show that, is as profound, as incredible as The Sopranos. But you just don't feel that at all, And little things like that, where even the supporting characters, even the side characters that only show up for one scene in Breaking Bad, all act like they're trying to get an Oscar. You know what I mean? That to me makes a huge difference. It's little things like that that make a huge difference. I think the acting and the acting chops of the characters in Breaking Bad is a huge reason as to why I find it a better show. And I just find in general the story of a high school teacher turned kingpin to be much more interesting than a kingpin turned kingpin. So. All right, I'm gonna get going now. Nick110, you have a great narration voice. That's the last comment I'm gonna address. Thank you very much, Nick. I appreciate it. Stratospheric crime is correlated with poverty. You're damn right it is. All right, so this was fun. This was very fun. I'm gonna get going now. Y'all have a great night. Take care. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves. And keep an eye out for my next video. It's coming soon. And y'all ain't seen nothing like this yet. From me, at least. You haven't seen anything like this yet. And I'm just getting started.